Now, a Calgary Council motion on shoplifting passed a hurdle at committee yesterday. As we heard from Councillor Andre Chabot on yesterday's show, he wants the city to look into what role it could take in dealing with petty theft under $100. Now, he says too many of these crimes are either going unreported or unprosecuted. For more on the size of the issue and how shoplifting impacts retail businesses here in Calgary and across the country, we're joined by Rui Rodrigues from the Retail Council of Canada. He's the group's executive advisor on loss prevention and risk management. So what does your research say about how big the problem of shoplifting is across the country?
Well, shoplifting, and I prefer to refer to it a retail crime, but we'll explain. It continues to be a growing concern for retailers across the country. Shoplifting is an issue that we've dealt forever and will continue to be an issue, and meaning the regular theft of product. The reason I distinguish it with retail crime is looking at the more aggravated nature of shoplifting and theft. So the repeat theft, the organized retail theft, the theft that involves violence and assaults on retail workers, which is becoming a much more severe and complex issue for us to deal with.
On that matter, like if a shopkeeper or a retail worker are assaulted, does that not rise to the level of being handled by police and the court system in the end?
It does, and it should always be looked at that way. The challenge has been when you look at a retail theft and the fact that it is perceived as just a property crime, even in many cases where there is a theft that involves a weapon or involves violence, aggressive behavior, many times what we see is when that is brought forward by police to courts, to a prosecutor, the items of assault or weapon use typically get pled down or may, and then it's dealt with just a theft. Therefore, the more severe part of that crime is pled out. We're seeing a change in that as we continue to advocate to make sure when we're looking at a property crime like theft, we're not just looking at the incident of theft, but we're looking at all the aggravating parts of that incident and focus on those that are more severe, not use those as means to leverage a quick and speedy result for the criminal. And then obviously looking at that criminal, that if they are repeated and looking at aggregated values, that they are continuously engaged in theft or aggressive behavior, that the consequences become severe and it's proportionate to that criminal.
And that's an interesting set of points because, Calgary City Council is exploring ways of, and nothing has happened yet, but the city admin now is looking into what other jurisdictions are doing, et cetera, of handling, these shoplifting incidents or property crimes of $100 or less as a municipal bylaw offense. Like, how does that fit in? How does that idea fit into this matrix of concerns you're raising?
So the idea is quite good if executed well. And what I mean by that, it certainly would relieve pressure on police to deal with the low-level crime if it truly is the first-time offenders and it is a theft incident that is small in nature. The challenge with it, so, I would quote that the fact that it's certainly faster, cheaper, transferring it where bylaw officers can deal with it if it is treated appropriately. Now, if you have a repeat offender who are stealing $60 every single day and is doing so for the purpose of resale and it's fueling organized crime groups, you can't have that person be caught in that. And that's the danger of moving it into a citation type mode to try to make it more expedient, that potentially those folks who are making a living of this and are treated as single incidents of, and it's not aggregated, fall into this mix and therefore never face criminal charges, convictions, and that of that nature. So it can be dangerous if not dealt with properly, that criminals will just adjust to that, steal below that threshold, do it frequently, get off with a simple citation. I think we need to be careful about how that approach is executed.
Right. So look, let's be totally clear about what we know and what we don't. So you're talking about organized crime, and it's funny. I listened to a show about property crime and shoplifting earlier this morning, kind of globally, from a global perspective, and organized crime is a big part of this. So I'm not casting any aspersions, but we're talking about organized crime. We had the counselor yesterday talking about shoplifting to support a drug habit. we have people in desperate socioeconomic situations. Like, what do you understand to be the mix and proportionality of who and why these crimes are being committed?
So what I can share is what we get from members when we survey, and it's not a perfect science, of course, but we see a shift in, there's the shoplifting and the regular incidents into more of the repeated nature of shoplifting, as well as the connections to organized groups, the organizational complexity where there is resale of those goods, either through online marketplaces, brick and mortar fences. So that is certainly on the rise. So shoplifting is still out there. However, what we see more and more is the increase of the repeated nature of the theft, the resale value or the resale of those stolen items. So it's not for personal consumption, and the continued growth of organized entities, which whether it's small group or larger groups, and there isn't anything that clearly defines organized retail crime yet. We hear the term organized crime, but we are working with government to introduce language that actually speaks to what organized retail crime is so that we can help define what those consequences could look like, so that it's not treated just as theft of retail merchandise.
What do you hear from police in your role of sort of sharing your research and advocating for solutions to these challenges? What do you hear from police about this sort of, again, we're talking municipally about the stuff that's under $100?
Similar to what we hear from retailers, and the Retail Council of Canada started a national retail crime task force almost 3 years ago, where we bring together police, retailers across the country, in some cases justice in certain areas, to focus on this issue. And the common theme is, again, we recognize shoplifting exists. The fact that we are not recognizing and or working more collectively to deal with the repeat offenders, the aggravated violent offenders, and the organized retail crime groups is a feedback we hear from everyone. So even when retail members are working very closely with police to investigate, identify, and bring charges forward to those individuals that are repeat offenders, so the aggregated values, or an organized retail crime group has been identified that is very complex, has resale connections to it, it's still difficult when we come to the courts to get those convictions. So it's not having the right legislation, seeing the right criminal code amendments, which is things we're now in conversations with both provincially and federally, to look at making those amendments so that the courts have better tools, better resources that they can leverage against these individuals. So looking at bail reform, looking at sentencing guidelines, so that, again, aggravated values, organizational complexity, consecutive sentencing can be looked at, so that it's not longer just looked at as a retail theft, but looked at the individuals involved. If it's more complex, if they are repeat, if they are selling for resale, that all of those factors come into consideration when the justice is applying convictions for those charges.